Today there's a cord stretched across my driveway because we are driving the second Cadillac plug-in hybrid available in America. It's the 2018 CT6 Plug-in Hybrid, also known as the CT6 2.0e. Thematically, you could think of this hybrid system as a variant of what we saw under the hood of the Cadillac ELR, but the vehicle overall is very, very different. This is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, that was a front-wheel drive vehicle. This has considerably more power than that Cadillac ELR, and this drives like a full-size luxury car. In kind of an interesting twist, the CT6 plug-in hybrid is not the result of California's zero emissions mandate or any federal government policies in the United States. This is the result of changing demographics for Cadillac owners, because the average Cadillac buyer in 2007 was not living in America, but living in China, because Cadillac now sells more cars in that country than they do right here. That shouldn't surprise too much, of course, because the Chinese car market is absolutely exploding, and if it has not already surpassed the United States, it will be very soon in terms of overall car volume. And the Chinese government is very aggressive at making manufacturers deliver EVs and plug-in hybrids to reduce emissions. And that's why this CT6 is not only designed for the Chinese market, it's actually built in China too. If that sounds familiar, that's because the Volvo S90 hybrid is also built in China. Before we go any further, you should know that Cadillac is refreshing the CT6 for the 2019 model year, and that is not the model year we're looking at here. This is a 2018 model year vehicle. Next year brings a few tweaks to the outside of the vehicle, a few tweaks to the inside of the vehicle, and a new engine under the hood, but the basics of the CT6 will remain the same. This is still expected to be 204 inches long, just like the model that we're looking at right here, which puts this sort of in the middle of the pack in terms of overall dimensions for the luxury segment. The BMW 7 Series and the Lexus LS are about 2 inches longer than this, and of course the Mercedes comes in a few different lengths. In the United States we get two of them. We get the long one and the even longer one, and those will both be longer than the CT6. But this is about 4 inches longer than the Volvo S90. Aside from some very discreet badges low on the rear doors, the only other way you'll know this is the plug-in model is this 2.0e badge right here on the trunk lid to differentiate it from the 2.0t model. We have two tips right over here for the exhaust on the passenger side, nothing over there on the driver's side. The backup light is in this little module right there. Well-integrated parking sensors and very attractive tail lights in my mind. Be sure and let me know what you think about the overall design of the CT6 down there in the comment section below. I have always liked Cadillac's angular art and science design themes, and the CT6 I think looks really attractive. Cadillac has a surprisingly large selection of engines available under the hood of the CT6. Things start out with a 2-liter turbocharged engine making 265 horsepower. We then get a naturally aspirated 3.6-liter V6 producing 335 horsepower. A 3-liter twin-turbo engine producing 404, and for 2019, we have a 4.2-liter twin-turbo V8 making a whopping 550 horsepower and a very impressive 627 pound-feet of torque. The first three engines are mated only to an 8-speed automatic transmission, and the 4.2-liter twin-turbo V8 will get the new 10-speed automatic transmission. We don't yet know whether the 10-speed automatic transmission will be used in the other engine options for 2019, or whether Cadillac is going to discontinue any of those engine options for 2019. I suspect that we won't know for sure until sometime later in the 2018 calendar year. But enough of those engine options. We're here to talk about the plug-in hybrid. On the surface of things, this sounds similar to BMW's 740e because they both use 2-liter turbocharged engines. You'll find that one right here, of course, and it features direct injection and variable valve timing. But that's where the similarity between the two vehicles ends, because this hybrid system is actually thematically more similar to the current generation Chevy Volt than what we see in the BMW plug-in hybrid. The 2-liter turbo engine produces the same horsepower and torque figures that we find in the CT6 2.0t. But instead of being mated to an 8-speed automatic transmission with a clutch pack and an electric motor inserted in there, we actually have a unique hybrid drivetrain that uses 2 electric motors, 5 clutches, and 3 planetary gear sets. I'm not really going to go into detail about how this hybrid system functions because it is fairly complicated. But thematically it works more like the Chevy Volts than those other systems. And power comes in at 335 horsepower, 432 pound-feet of torque. This system can operate in a pure EV mode up to highway speeds around 80 miles an hour or so. Both electric motors can be used to drive the vehicle forward, or they can be used in concert with the engine to drive the vehicle forward via either a serial mode, a parallel mode, or a mode where the engine actually has 3 fixed ratios to choose from to send power directly to the rear axle. That helps improve performance, reduce system losses, and help improve temperatures inside the transmission as well. In the back of the vehicle, we find an 18.4 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack. This is similar to what we see in the Chevy Volt, but it's actually not the same pack because this one is sitting across the rear, not in the tunnel. And of course, this is rear-wheel drive, so it couldn't be there. The drive shaft needs to be there. Because of the size and the weight of this vehicle, obviously the range is lower than the Chevy Volt, even though the battery is about the same size. You get 53 miles in the Volt in electric mode, 31 in this vehicle in electric mode. It'll charge via this charge port right here in about 4.5 hours if you have access to 240 volt AC. If you're using the emergency charger right here, then it'll take about 18 hours or so. Because the CT6 is made in China and they aren't expecting sales to really light the barn on fire, this is available only in one trim level. There are a few limited options that you can select from, but basically what you're seeing in this video is what you get for this model year. And that's why we don't find the upgraded seat package in this vehicle that we find in other versions of the CT6. I find that seat very, very comfortable, but this one a little bit less comfortable. And for the luxury car segment, I'm going to have to give this seat 7 out of 10 points. I found the seat bottom cushion to be a little bit short, and because we don't have that thigh extension, I can't change it. We do have a 4-way adjustable lumbar support, but we don't have the massage functionality that we find in that other top-end trim CT6. We do, however, have a power tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion, and the passenger seat has the same range of motion as the driver's seat. The other reason that I mentioned the S90 initially is because in some ways this rear passenger compartment has a little bit more in common with that Volvo. Combined legroom is actually more similar to the Volvo than the BMW 740i. You'll find about 3 inches more legroom in that 740. And headroom is a little bit better in the BMW and the Mercedes as well. Although headroom is definitely better than the Volvo. If I sit back in this seat, my head is not touching the ceiling, although I only have about ½ an inch of headroom left. The model that we're driving has the panoramic moonroof. That's the only way you can get the plug-in hybrid. If I move to the middle seat, then my head does touch the ceiling if I try and put my head back there on the headrest, but we do have enough width back here that 3 across could be comfortable. The real area where you'll notice the lack of legroom versus those larger German options is over here on the right side where this front seat was adjusted for a 6'5" passenger. It's all the way back in its tracks and the footwell is quite cramped and I only have about 1 inch of legroom left. The battery in the CT6 is very large for this segment. This is nearly double the capacity of the battery that we find in the Volvo or the BMW, and nearly 20 times the size of the battery that we find in the Lexus LS500H. And that's why this battery could not be under the seats like we find in the Lexus. Because this is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, it couldn't be in the tunnel of the vehicle like we find in the Volvo. And because this is double what we find in the BMW, it couldn't be down there in the spare tire well either. So instead, it's right there at the back of the trunk, cutting capacity from 15.3 cubic feet down to 10.6. This is a 22-inch roller bag. You can see you could barely fit one right there in the middle. You could also just barely fit perhaps 2 of them side by side right there in that position, and then smaller luggage on each side because you can't actually squeeze this over here to the side and still close the trunk lid. That's also, of course, why we don't find a folding rear seat back or a trunk pass-through. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts and 4-way adjustable headrests. Leather upholstery is standard, and the seats are both heated and ventilated. As you'd expect out of a luxury vehicle, the front doors are made from almost entirely soft touch materials. We have a stitched upper section right there. The seat controls are on the door right here, memory seats for the driver and front passenger. And then we find more stitched material here for the soft touch armrest. The standard audio system for the plug-in hybrid is a Bose system, but this is not the Panerai system that we see in some of the top-end trims of the non-hybrid models. The dashboard features a stitched design, but unlike top-end trims of the CT6, this is not leather, this is actually pleather, so it doesn't look quite as nice as those top-end non-hybrid versions. We have some perforated material right there around the standard color touchscreen infotainment system. This is running the latest version of Cadillac Q, but Q itself will get a refresh for 2019, so we expect this to be a little bit different in next year's model. You'll still find the engine start-stop button right over there, mute button. We have some digital touch controls for the volume slider right there, and then a home button to take you back to that home screen. Because this is a plug-in hybrid, we have some dedicated plug-in screens. For instance, you can control when we charge, the charge limit, and that only applies to the temporary charging cord that we're using. There's a flow gauge, so you can see where the power is going when you're in operation. There's a shadowy engine and transmission right there. And then we can click the info screen to see some of those fuel economy displays that we typically see in hybrids. We have a combined Mpg score, a Mpg score just for the electric mode, and then a fuel economy score for just when the vehicle was operating as a hybrid. It's combining those two numbers to give you this one right over here. One of the key differences between the plug-in hybrid model and the other models is that we don't have the availability of a 4-zone climate control system. We have a pretty traditional shifter right here. We have drive and then manual mode, one behind there, although this is not manual in the traditional sense. Instead, the manual mode in this vehicle simply controls the regenerative braking. We have 4 different levels of regen braking. We then have 2 cup holders here that are fairly small, and then we have a small lid that covers them. If you were to try and put 2 larger American takeout drinks in these cup holders, the lids would be touching. Behind that, we have a touchpad for the infotainment system. You can either use this as the input method, or you can simply touch the screen. Personally, I found touching the screen easier. For 2019, Cadillac is ditching this touchpad, and instead they're giving us a rotary knob more like MMI and iDrive. There's a back button right there that also works with the system. To the left of that, we have the auto brake hold button, traction control disable, and then a mode button to change between Tour, Sport, and the battery hold button. There is no mountain mode like you find in a Chevy Volt. You only see half of my smartphone right now because this is a wireless charging slot designed to allow easy access to your smartphones. Cadillac has decided to make this slot a little bit bigger for 2019 because, as you can see, my iPhone 7 Plus is a pretty tight fit right there. Now, this one doesn't support wireless charging, and that's why I have that charge cable connected. Between the front seats, we find a leather padded armrest that opens to the side. You can also open it from the other side if you so desire. And under here, we find a fairly small storage area where you can keep wallets, keys, that sort of thing. This is not terribly deep, obviously, because the transmission and drive shaft are right under there. On the driver's side, we find a full LCD instrument cluster that is controlled via some buttons on the steering wheel. If you look closely here, you'll notice that we have a thin blue line right here for our fuel level. We then have a thin green line up here for our battery level. It's almost at 50%. And then you'd find a similar line over here on the left side for the power and charge gauge. It would go down there past 0 for charging and up there on this side for the power level. Because the vehicle is stopped and plugged in, we don't see that gauge in operation right there. Although you can see that it is charging at about a rate of 1 kilowatt. The display is separated into 3 different zones. Over here, you can choose between blank pages, trip computer readouts, compasses, range, oil life, etc. Although I prefer to have that particular power gauge showing when I'm driving. You'll see in the middle that we have this notification about night vision because this vehicle does come standard with that night vision camera option. You get some very similar readouts in this screen right here. For instance, the media readout, navigation, etc. And then on the right side, we have basically the same readouts that we found on the left side. You could actually even choose to have the same one showing on both sides if you so desire. Unlike some of Cadillac's other products, there are just 2 different layouts for this particular screen arrangement. You can get more of a traditional layout right here, where you would have some information over here on the right. You could then choose some limited information right there in the center, or that night vision display. And then, of course, we get the trip computer information or power readout over here on the left. The steering wheel is a 4-spoke design shared with the other CT6 models. We have standard radar adaptive cruise control over here on the left with a distance button there and a lane keeping button. You'll notice that we don't have Cadillac's Super Cruise system available in the plug-in hybrid model at this time. We have a dedicated voice button, phone button right there. You'll find the volume up down over here on this side, along with this button arrangement that controls that multifunction screen. You'll find track forward and backward unusually down here on the bottom spoke. We then have shift paddles on the back of the steering wheel that are a little bit difficult to see, down on the left and up on the right. Again, those don't actually change gear ratios. These just affect the regenerative braking. You can choose between 4 different levels. Let's start out with the performance numbers first, then we'll talk about how this drivetrain feels out on the road. 0 to 60 happened in 5.1 seconds, which is just a hair slower than the BMW 740e. That actually surprised me a little bit because the CT6 plug-in hybrid is 200 pounds lighter than the BMW. Now do keep in mind, this is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, not an all-wheel drive vehicle like the 740e. The rear-wheel drive only nature of this is actually one of the key differences between this and the competition, because the 740e and the S90 T8 are both all-wheel drive only, and the Lexus LS500H is available with all-wheel drive. However, this is still very, very light compared to those competitors. 200 pounds lighter than the BMW, 90 pounds lighter than the Volvo, even though the Volvo is a little bit shorter than this overall, and a whopping 350 pounds lighter than the Lexus LS 500h rear-wheel drive, even though this has a battery that is about 20 times larger than that Lexus battery. The light curb weight obviously helps improve the acceleration in this model, and it also helps improve the braking scores. This model stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 114 feet. That's a full 10 feet shorter than the BMW, and it's essentially identical to the Volvo S90. The last model of Volvo that we tested had slightly grippier tires than what we see on this CT6, and that's likely why braking scores were identical even though it is a little bit heavier. When it comes to handling, I'm going to give this an A+ when compared to other plug-in hybrid vehicles in this same segment. That would again include that 740e and probably that S90 as well. This also does very well when compared against all the hybrid entries in this segment, which you could expand out to the LS 500h and perhaps the Infiniti Q70 hybrid, although that is a decent amount smaller than this. There aren't really that many traditional hybrids here. Keeping in mind that this is about 360 pounds heavier than the 3.6-liter V6 version of the CT6. Even though that model has standard all-wheel drive, obviously this is not going to handle quite as well as the naturally aspirated V6 CT6. However, this still does very well even if you were to include regular entries in this segment in terms of overall handling ability and handling feel. The CT6 is a very light vehicle all the way around. GM has really put a lot of effort into reducing curb weight, and that plays right into the handling ability of this car. In addition to the light curb weight, Cadillac also has a dedication to handling feel, so the suspension design in this vehicle is definitely very, very well designed. Now, this model does not get the magnetic suspension system that we see available in other trims of the CT6. I think that is a pity. It's all part of the sort of experiment of bringing the CT6 plug-in to America in the first place. Now, the ride does drop down a little bit, and I'm going to have to give this a B- when it comes to the ride because we don't have that adaptive suspension system in this model, and we don't have an air suspension either, which we do find in other large luxury sedans. In terms of overall ride quality, this actually feels a little bit more similar to the S90 in some ways, a mid-size luxury sedan like the 5 Series or the E-Class or that Volvo. Mid-size luxury sedans tend to be a little bit firmer, even the ones that have been stretched like the Volvo, because those vehicles are designed more for people that are driving the car and less for cars that might have people being driven in them. In terms of cabin noise, this scored very well at 70 decibels, but this is a little bit louder than the BMW or the Mercedes competition, so I'm going to have to give this an A- when it comes to our overall cabin noise score. Talking about fuel economy in a plug-in hybrid can be a little bit tricky to begin with, but it's made even trickier because General Motors chooses to display the fuel economy in a few different ways depending on what screen you're looking at. Arguably, that is because fuel economy can be looked at several different ways. So, while this vehicle is operating as a hybrid only, we've been getting between 26 and 27 miles per gallon combined. And that is with the battery essentially at a zero charge state. So it's just rolling around there in that hybrid zone. If, however, you take the distance that we drove this week and then you look at the fuel economy in terms of simply gasoline consumed to go that distance, then this has been averaging about 45 miles per gallon. Except that that number doesn't really give any weight to the electricity used. It's not counting that electricity at all. And obviously that electricity cost you something. So then we get an entirely different display, which is the Mpg Combined Display. And if you look at that display, then we've been averaging about 33 or 34 Mpg combined. If you take a look at a different display in this vehicle, then it will give you an Mpg average when this vehicle has been operating electricity only. And that's been coming in right around 53 miles per gallon. The trouble with all these various ways of showing you fuel economy is that you don't buy electricity in Mpge. If this has already confused you, don't worry, plug-in hybrid owners have been battling this confusing state for some time. There's a great divergence of opinion in exactly how we should be defining fuel economy in vehicles like this. There doesn't really seem to be a standard, so you just need to keep that in mind. With that out of the way, let's talk about how this hybrid system feels out on the road. This feels perhaps a little bit more like the Lexus hybrid and less like the BMW or Volvo hybrids. And that's because the BMW and Volvo hybrids use traditional 8-speed automatic transmissions to send engine power to the wheels. So when those vehicles are operating simply on the gasoline engine, it feels like a regular vehicle with definite gear shifts. Now, when those two vehicles are in electric operation, then they actually feel different. Because the Volvo has an electric motor on the rear axle, it simply drives the wheels directly. It feels like an electric car, albeit one with only a little bit over 80 horsepower. The BMW, on the other hand, sends its power through that 8-speed automatic transmission at all times, even when it is operating as an electric vehicle, so you're still going to feel those shifts. The BMW 740e also has an interesting feel when you start braking, because the power is, again, still going through that 8-speed automatic transmission. That is not what we feel in this vehicle or in the Lexus hybrid system. This uses a planetary gear set style hybrid system, more similar to what we see in the Chevy Volt. And as a result, this feels more like the Volt out on the road. On the downside, very much like the Chevy Volt, there are occasionally some unusual noises coming from underneath the hood, like right now in this low-speed situation where the car has decided it needs to involve the gasoline engine to help us up the hill. Even though we're only going about 30 miles an hour, the engine speed sounds a little bit peculiar, and that's because it's not always directly linked to the speed that the vehicle is going. In that respect, this is more similar to what we see under the hood of the Lexus LS500. But because this is a plug-in hybrid, not a regular hybrid, this obviously has a greater EV ability than that Lexus model. This also has a greater EV ability than the Volvo or the BMW. You can actually drive at highway speeds pretty easily, and you can accelerate fairly nicely in electric-only mode. That's because we get up to about 130, 160 horsepower, depending on exactly how you're treating this system in order to help move you forward. On the downside, transitions between EV mode and hybrid mode are not quite as smooth as we find in the competitive systems, and that just seems to be the overall design of this system. Because this system can use both of the electric motors in the transmission to drive the car forward, there is a moment where power has to get reduced in order to start the gasoline engine. So if we're cruising along like this and we start really pushing the boundaries of that EV mode, we're accelerating, and then there's a moment where the acceleration slows down greatly. That's because it has to stop using one of those motors and use that motor to start the engine. Then the engine can join the party, then you get more acceleration. So it is a little bit of an unusual feeling depending on exactly how you're driving the car. There are also a few moments where you may get something that feels sort of like a transmission shift, but not quite a traditional transmission shift. Overall, I found this hybrid system very, very impressive, and I really hope that Cadillac brings this to more models in the United States. The EV range is absolutely excellent, and the overall polish that we find in this system is very, very good. There are a few unusual noises coming from under the hood every now and then, but that is to be expected in any hybrid system. But if you're looking for a smooth, effortless acceleration experience, that is definitely something that you'll find in this vehicle versus those other vehicles. So if you are carrying passengers in the back, for instance, then this is going to feel smoother than a traditional automatic transmission. As I said at the beginning, hybridization and electrification make for strange bedfellows when it comes to comparisons. That's also made difficult with the CT6 because of its starting price. It starts at $54,095 for the non-hybrid version. That's about $7,000 more than a Cadillac CTS, but actually about $14,000 less than a Genesis G90. So the CT6 is quite inexpensive for a full-size luxury sedan. In fact, a BMW 7 Series is nearly $30,000 more for its base price than a base CT6. So when you take a look at the base interior of the CT6 and you think to yourself it's not as nice as a 7 Series, remember that you could buy a Cadillac ATS and a CT6 for the same price as a base BMW 7 Series. It's important to keep that in mind. It's also important to keep in mind that the plug-in hybrid is notably more expensive than the base CT6, and it only comes in that one configuration. The configuration is approximately the equal of a mid-level trim CT6 with the 3.6-liter V6 engine. The plug-in hybrid is still about $10,000 more than that comparable 3.6-liter option, but we do see the $7,500 tax credit for the moment. It's important to remember that Cadillac's tax credit will expire at the same time as the rest of the GM tax credits, likely sometime around the 1st of next year. Our first, and in my mind, the truest competitor is the Volvo S90. The S90 again has been stretched for 2018, so it is about the same size as the CT6 overall. Because of the way the S90 has been designed, even though it's not as long on the outside, it actually is just about as big on the inside because the hood is a little bit shorter up front. The S90 starts about $6,000 less, so actually the delta between CT6 and S90 is smaller than between CT6 and 7 Series. But if you get carried away with options, as we see in most European vehicles, the Volvo can get considerably more expensive than the CT6 plug-in, up to about $80,000. The Volvo also qualifies for the same $7,500 tax credit as the Cadillac, but because Volvo has not sold as many EVs or plug-in hybrids, that tax credit is expected to continue for several years longer. The Volvo hybrid system is more powerful, producing 400 horsepower total versus the 335 that we see in the Cadillac. As a result, the Volvo is notably faster 0 to 60. But the way that the two vehicles get 0 to 60 is a little bit different. Because the Volvo system, although faster, is sending most of its power through the front wheels, whereas the Cadillac is rear-wheel drive only. There's no all-wheel drive version of the plug-in. So in terms of overall driving dynamics, the CT6 is superior, but in terms of actually getting you to highway speed faster, the Volvo is very, very quick. I would say that in the base version of the S90, interior materials are fairly similar to comparably priced CT6 models, but as you climb the ladder, Volvo is a little bit more eager to swap out some of those parts for higher level options like the stitched leather dashboard, etc. Those do appear to feel more premium in the Volvo than what we see in the CT6. Again, it's worth noting that the CT6 plug-in hybrid doesn't have the same level of options and upgrades available as we see in the rest of the CT6 lineup. So do keep that in mind when you're making that comparison with the S90. When you're comparing gasoline version against gasoline version, you will find many of those same interior upgrades available in the CT6, but with the plug-in hybrid, we don't see that. The limited configuration really is key to understanding the plug-in hybrid and how it compares, because you can't, for instance, get the brand new and excellent Cadillac Super Cruise system in the plug-in hybrid of the CT6, but you can get it in the other trims. In terms of overall plug-in hybrid smoothness, I think the Volvo system is actually smoother in some situations than what we see in the Cadillac, but the Cadillac has superior driving dynamics and better range in EV mode because the battery is considerably bigger. Now on the downside, that bigger battery does eat up trunk space, and we see the same trunk practicality in the S90 as we see in the regular model because of the way they have positioned that battery. The only other real direct competitor for the CT6 PHEV is the BMW 740e. That starts at $90,700, which is notably more than the CT6, however. But once General Motors tax credits start expiring, that window will start to narrow, and it'll end up being about $6,000 between the two vehicles ultimately, because the BMW will qualify for the tax credit for several years longer, and the Cadillac will not. The 7 Series hybrid system is actually not as smooth or as well integrated, I think, as the Cadillac system. We also don't find the EV range or as much ability to operate in EV mode in that BMW system because of its overall design. And it's not just about the way the hybrid system accelerates or the passing power in that hybrid system. It also has to do with the way the vehicle brakes, because remember, when you're regenerative braking in the BMW system, the power is going back through that 8-speed automatic transmission, whereas we don't see that same power course in the Cadillac system. The Cadillac system is much smoother on the regen braking. The BMW interior, I think, is more premium than what we find in the Cadillac, and all-wheel drive is standard, but remember, it is significantly more expensive. BMW also offers about the same level of customization in the 7 Series plug-in as the rest of the 7 Series lineup, and again, that is one of the limitations with the CT6. When it comes to overall driving dynamics, some of you may be surprised to hear that the CT6 really is the winner against the 7 Series. The 7 Series is a very well-rounded vehicle, but when it comes to actual handling dynamics, the CT6 really is the better performing car out on the road, just due to its overall design. And that's pretty much it when it comes to the competition, because Mercedes does not have a plug-in hybrid E-Class or a plug-in hybrid S-Class at this moment. The Audi plug-in hybrid is an A3 wagon. We may see a plug-in hybrid version of the upcoming Audi A8, but it actually may be in a different price category than the Cadillac CT6 ultimately, and the Lexus LS500H is a standard hybrid, not a plug-in hybrid. So when everything else is added up, it comes down to a would you buy the 740e, the CT6 plug-in hybrid, or the Volvo S90 T8. I would say this is a close call because the 7 Series is very large on the inside. I love the way that it's a very well-rounded package, but it is pretty expensive. And for the same price as that 740e, you could buy a fully loaded Volvo S90 T8 plug-in hybrid with more bells and whistles and another car before you even approach the cost of a comparably equipped 740e. I love the driving dynamics on the CT6 plug-in hybrid system. I love the way that hybrid system works in general. I wish that Cadillac would put that in other models soon, But the Volvo system is a little bit more practical, even though it does give up on driving dynamics, because we have that full usable trunk available. If Cadillac decides to put the plug-in hybrid system on the upper end trims of the CT6, then I think the CT6 would be a good, solid win in this segment. It's less expensive than the BMW. I think it's better value. If it had the Cadillac Super Cruise system, then it would have the gadgets to compete with some of the rest of the competition. But I think as it is, I would buy the Volvo S90 T8 over the Cadillac CT6 because of its better rounded nature, its more luxurious interior, and of course the fact that you can add those options, comfort features, etc. It's definitely more comfortable inside than the Cadillac because you're stuck with the base seats in the Cadillac plug-in hybrid. When it comes to overall value, the Volvo beats the BMW 7 Series by a wide enough margin that it would be my pick. Thanks for taking time to check out this video. Be sure and hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen. Be sure and check out the related videos on your screen if you haven't already done so. Hit that button up at the top of your screen if you want to support this channel. And as always, head over to facebook.com/AlexNautos to see what we're driving this week.